So thank you for coming to what I am sure will be a great event. I think I'm really excited to see so many awake and conscious people here on a Saturday morning. And I just want to introduce Erica and Nancy, who are the organizers of this event. They've worked tirelessly to make this happen, and I think to be really honest, when we started this, we were like, if we get 100 people, this would be really great, really amazing. And then we got the venue, and then we said if we got 200 people, this would be really good. And as of yesterday, we have almost, or probably more than 400 people registered for this conference. So I think that really says how important this issue is. I think it says how important this issue is, and I just want to really acknowledge Erica and Nancy for really planning a spectacular day, and I'm happy that you guys will be here today with us.
Hey everyone, my name is Erica, this is Nancy. We're the student coordinators of the GRI. We just wanted to give you a few logistical pieces of information before we start. Breakfast is down these aisles in the back with coffee and muffins and everything, so help yourself throughout the morning. Bathrooms are kind of where you came in downstairs. There's signs outside, and if you have any questions, anyone in these black t-shirts can answer them for you. So we represent the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative, which is a new program out of Penn School of Social Policy and Practice, and we pair social work students. They're placed in prison, and we work with people the last 3 months of their incarceration and continue the first 3 months they're out. So Nancy's going to give you a little bit more info, and we'll get started.
Great. So yeah, thank you all for coming. We're excited that it's not snowing and that so many people are here to enjoy delicious free breakfast and to get this conversation going. Again, the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative is just in its second year, so we're in the process of building that and really building our coalitions within the community. I know there are a number of people that we've been working with, clients and also various agencies from the community here today, so thank you all for coming. I want to talk a little bit about today's conference. We know it's a long day, so bear with us. Obviously there's free coffee and breakfast here today, and then at lunch there will be food sold in the lobby by a couple food trucks. We'll talk to you about that later. And there also will be free coffee and snacks after lunch, so that we don't have that like siesta lull. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about kind of the base of the day, and then we will get out of your hair for a while. So the first panel, after our opening speaker, who you'll hear about in a sec, first panel is really focusing on humanizing mass incarceration, so you'll hear from individuals who have a personal experience to share so that we don't continue to think about mass incarceration as this thing that happens with this other group of people who's far from our world and who's criminalized or demonized. So that's kind of the beginning of the day.
And then the second panel is going to look at some of the social problems that are causes and consequences of the criminal justice system, so we can understand it at the larger systemic level, what results from having such high levels of incarceration. And then in the afternoon, the last panel is action-oriented. We hope that everyone leaves here with a deeper understanding of the issues related with the criminal justice system, but also a sense of how to act and how to challenge the oppressive criminal justice system. And then the last thing we'll have today is our keynote speaker, Mark Lamont Hill. So
just one more note. You should have gotten an evaluation on your way in, just a half sheet. So we really encourage folks to fill those out. This is the first annual event of this kind, so we really want to continue it for many, many years to come. But it would obviously become better and stronger and more impressive if people can give us their feedback. So please do fill that out, and then where you registered, there's a place for you to drop that off. So anyway.
And now Kirk James, the program director of the GRI, is going to introduce our opening speaker.
Let's give it up for Erica and Nancy. So I have really quick one announcement before I introduce Glenn Martin. If someone left an iPhone, this iPhone, okay, don't worry, I'll give it to him shortly. So this person that I'm going to introduce is someone who is an amazing individual, just to be really honest, right? I think even this conversation about mass incarceration, it's a conversation that's impacted communities for way too long, but yet no one has spoken about it. You know, it's a conversation that's only had by people who are directly impacted. It's a conversation that's oftentimes had in the dark. Glenn Martin is one of those people who's worked tirelessly to make sure that this is a mainstream issue. This is an issue that we can have this conversation today here at the University of Pennsylvania on a Saturday morning. So I could actually tell you tons of things about Glenn, but I won't. He's already shaking his head. And he already told me last night that, you know, my intro needs to be really short and to the point. So without further ado, Glenn Martin, Vice President from the Fortune Society.
Thank you, Dr. James, aka my man Kirk. That's how I know him, as my man Kirk. I'm honored to be his friend. I think it's amazing what he's been able to he's been able to do since I've met him. And little does he know that he's a huge part of my inspiration. Kirk is the sort of guy that leaps and builds the wings on his way down. And I appreciate people like that. And I think the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative is an example of Kirk's ability to be courageous and to do things where other people see barriers. So I'm honored to be here today. I'm honored to have the opportunity to open up today's conference. I'd like to thank the Gold Ring Reentry Initiative and the other organizers, not just for the amazing work that they do day to day to create a continuum of care for people who are exiting our criminal justice system, but also for the fact that they are creating a voice for people who tend to be voiceless in this world. The name of the conference, Breaking Down Walls, Intersections of Mass Incarceration and Its Implications. I decided not to write a speech for today. I decided just to write some talking points, most of them while I was sitting here this morning, because I wanted to be inspired by some of the conversations I had while I walked into this space this morning. I'm the vice president of an organization called the Fortune Society in New York. We've been around for 46 years. We were founded as a result of a play off-Broadway written by a person who had done time in prison. And the name of the play was Fortune in Men's Eyes. And David Rothenberg, who was a theater agent at the time, invested his life savings in the play, about $12,000 at the time. And he ended up on national television in a show called The David Susskind Show. And the next day he came to his office in the theater district in New York, and there were about 50 people who had done time in prison waiting there saying, I saw you on television last night and I really need your help. And so that's 46 years ago. I mean, even today, we know there's a scarcity of programs to serve people involved in the criminal justice system. But imagine 46 years ago. So he walks into his office the next day, and there's this spiral staircase with about 50 people who had done time in prison waiting for him, saying, I saw you on television last night, and I really need your help. And David knew that he didn't know much about how to help people coming out of the criminal justice system, but he knew a lot about people, and he's a real people person, if you will, a great human being. And he asked 2 of the men online to be volunteers to help the other folks online. And that was the founding of the organization as a volunteer self-help advocacy organization. And I always start with that story because if you fast forward to today and I tell you who we are now, if you don't have the benefit of that background, it's easy to make assumptions about the agency because of the size of the agency. So we have 200 people on staff now. We serve 3,000 people per year. Every single person is someone who's been involved in the criminal justice system, whether they did a night in jail or 46 years in prison. Some of what works at the agency is some of the stuff you would expect from a large social service agency. We have a holistic approach to services. We have this amazing database that turns out all these results for government funders. We do individual advocacy and systemic advocacy. We have all these evidence-based interventions and all these treatment modalities. We do drug screening, all the sorts of stuff you would expect, all the stuff that the government requires, all the stuff that people don't bring up when you ask them, what was it that changed your life? Because I think what we really provide for people, every time I have a chance to talk to a client who is successful, and I say, what was it about Fortune that helped you become successful? They never say, oh, it was that amazing drug and alcohol treatment group, right? They say it was when I walked through the door, Vilma, who sits at the front desk, said, welcome home. And those are the sort of things they remember. I think it's Maya Angelou who said, people might forget what you tell them, but they never forget the way you make them feel. And so we spend a lot of time at DHC reminding people that they're human beings and rehumanizing the population. Even the language that we use. We don't use prisoner, we don't use ex-offender, we don't use ex-con. We remind ourselves and we remind each other to refer to people like people. And so what do we give people? We give people hope, we give them respect, we give them trust. We have a vision for our clients when they walk through the door, even if they don't have a vision for themselves. We empower our clients. We have a very low threshold for services. If you've been involved in the criminal justice system and you walk through the door and you're not carrying a bloody axe, you can get services at the Fortune Society. And if you're carrying a bloody axe, you just need to take it home and come back. And then you can get services at the Fortune Society. And that's a very deliberate approach to the work. We prioritize people who fail in our program. You're not going to do a 6-month intervention and turn people's lives around. Think about behaviors that you may be engaged in. And imagine if someone said, oh, you'll do a 30-day program or a 60-day program, and you're going to stop smoking. Or you're going to stop eating like that. Or you're going to stop drinking like that. Let's be honest, it takes a long time for human beings to change their behaviors. So when people screw up, and even if we have to kick them out of the program, we make a space for them to come back. Because reentry doesn't go from committing crime to doing the right thing and it's linear. It actually looks a lot like this. So people screw up. And the question is, are you going to make a space for them to come back when they do come back to your door? So we make a lifetime commitment to people. We have cultural competency. I think that's important. I told you we have 200 people on staff. Half of them have done time in prison. Very deliberate. We actually wrote a book about it called Employing Your Mission. That's all about how do you successfully hire people who've been involved in the criminal justice system. And not just because they did time. You're looking for professionals. You're looking for people that also have the professional skills, but may have the background to help inform the approach to the work. And yes, it's an investment. It means that you're making an investment in helping to build that person's capacity also. They may not have the credentialing it takes to do the job initially, but at Fortune, what we do is every year when we work on our budget, we ensure that we put resources in the budget to build their capacity. So a snapshot of where we are as a country, I think that's important. We have 2.3 million people in jail and prison in this country. We lead the world in incarceration. Right? We're number one. America likes to be number one. Well, we're number one. We lock up more people than anyone else. 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. And now we're paying the price, right? Every year we have 700,000 people coming home from prison and jail, from prison. We spend $64 billion on our prison system. Here in your state, we spend over $1 billion. You have 51,000 people in your prison today. Nationally, we have a recidivism rate of 66%. I can't think of any other industry that would operate with that sort of failure rate. And not only does this one continue to operate, but we continue to feed it resources. And in some states, we continue to build. In fact, I think in your state, you're continuing to build prisons. And we're privatizing our prisons. And so I guess if you're running a prison and you're trading stocks on Wall Street, a failure rate of 66% is a good thing. Because it means that you're going to have people filling up your prisons for a long time to come. And I'm sure your shareholders think that that's actually a good idea. So I read the testimony of your secretary, Mr. Secretary Wetzel, and he talked about how here in Pennsylvania, while the rest of the country is reducing its prison population, you had the fastest growing prison population. I mean, in New York State, where I come from, we've reduced our prison population by 20% over the last 10 years. In New York, where we hit a high of 72,000 back in the 90s during the crack epidemic. And so if you can reduce crime and prison in a state like New York, you should be able to do it anywhere. And that's a statement about the fact that you do not have to incarcerate your way to public safety, that there are other ways to get to public safety. If you can reduce crime in your prison population simultaneously, it bucks all the trend around being tough on crime and war on drugs and so on. There's other ways to get to public safety. But your budget, right? I talked about you guys spending over $1 billion. on running your prisons, your budget says a lot about your priorities and your values. And so if you're not building resources into your budget for alternative to incarceration and diversion programs, but instead building money into your budget for prisons, that says a lot about where you are as a state and the direction you want to go in. And so that means you should be pushing on your policymakers. You know, one thing I value about the Fortune Society is that we're also an advocacy organization, not just a direct service organization. We started as an advocacy organization. But I'm glad we're having this discussion in an academic institution, because people end up in the criminal justice system are products of our failed policies, whether it's our education policies, community development policies, economic development policies, our public health policies. So being in an academic institution, my hope is that as you think about the approach to the work, that you come from a strength-based analysis. Because it's so easy to come from a position of deficiency and thinking about what people are lacking. But I remember when I was in prison, I did 6 years in prison before I started doing this work 12 years ago. And I remember being in a cell with a gentleman, and he had a cigarette. He wanted to light the cigarette, and all he had was a pencil and an outlet. And he knew he could use the lead from the pencil to get it hot enough to light the cigarette. And then I remember a couple of months later, we wanted a cup of tea, and there was no way to warm the water. And I saw a gentleman take a plastic 2-liter soda bottle and hover it with a string just high enough over the fire so that the water would boil in the bottle without the bottle bursting. And I said, wait a minute, everything I've ever thought about people in the criminal justice system, people in prison, was wrong. We are locking up capacity, amazing capacity in our prisons. When you get to 2.3 million people in prison, you're no longer just locking up bad people. You are locking up everyone. And you are locking up what can be the cure to cancer. You are locking up the next great composer. That's what I experienced in prison. That's what Kirk and I experienced in prison. We both went to school in prison. I went to college in prison. I'm going to talk a bit about that in a second, because I'm a big fan of using education as an intervention to help change people's lives. And I want to talk about my experience in a second. I'm also glad that there's so many grassroots people in the room today, and so many people directly affected. Half the people I spoke to this morning on my way in are people who've done time in prison. And I'm a firm believer that people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so you have to have the voice of people who are directly impacted. You have to have the voice of people who are directly impacted in every room. And I'm proud to say in New York, we've gotten to the point because we have formerly incarcerated people who've been doing this work for a really long time in New York and speaking out publicly. And it's at the point now where almost no conversation happens in the state of New York around criminal justice without people directly impacted in the room. I mean, once a month, people who are directly impacted as part of a larger group of alternative to incarceration and reentry programs get to meet with the Secretary of Public Safety in that state once per month. And it's very deliberate that they're in that room. So where are we now? 10 years. About 10 years we've been engaged in reentry. And I think reentry is important. When Jeremy Travis met with Janet Reno and she asked, what are we going to do about the large numbers of people coming home from prison? And he coined this term reentry. I think that, and the field started to coalesce, and reentry is something that people started focusing on and building capacity and so on. I think those are all good things. And I work for a large reentry organization. We serve 3,000 people per year. About 2,500 of them are people coming home from prison. Reentry is important, but let's be honest. Like, reentry is like the emergency room of the criminal justice system. That's triage. And we can easily lose sight of how we got here, which is that we put way too many people in prison to begin with. So while reentry is important, let's not lose sight of going upstream and stopping the tide of so many people going into the criminal justice system to begin with. Because mass incarceration is a failed experiment. And it wasn't just about locking people up. First of all, we haven't been locking people up at this rate forever, right? You had the 60s, the end of the 60s, early 70s, and then you have this huge spike in incarceration. And if you take that line and you extrapolate it on that graph, you realize that it's mostly black men, and then mostly Latino men, and then over the last 12 or 15 years, mostly black and Latino women. And then it wasn't just about the amount of time we were putting people in prison, but it was about all the lifetime punishments that we've attached to being involved in the criminal justice system. And all that happened at the end of the civil rights era. So I like to think about the 4 E's: education, employment, enfranchisement, and equality. All the things that we fought hard for during the civil rights era have been taken away by the criminal justice system. So criminal record-based discrimination serves as an easy surrogate for race-based discrimination in this country. And so let's be reminded of that it's not just about the direct punishment, but it's also the lifetime punishment that comes along with having a criminal record. I run a $20 million agency. I have no doubt that if I went down the block from here and applied for a job at McDonald's, I may not get that job. And that's the impact of the criminal justice system in people's lives. Poor people and people of color mostly. For the rest of their lives, they are stained by the scarlet letter of having been involved in the criminal justice system. So as we do the triage work, the reentry work, helping people to get back on their feet, we need to continue to address the systemic issues. And we've also created all these mechanisms, right? So we've created all these alternative to incarceration programs, which are great, except I think we shouldn't even be calling them alternative to incarceration programs, because the assumption is that prison is the first option, and we should be finding alternatives. So I think even that's a misnomer. I think as a country, we need to get to the point where prison is the last option. Because when people end up in prison, it is a societal failure, not just the individual person. We should all own that every time we have to send a person away to prison. I had a young man the other day. I got a call from one of my funders, and she said, my housekeeper's grandson got locked up. I said, tell me about it. She said he had a gun charge, endangering the welfare of a child, attempted assault, all of these pretty serious felony charges. And so most people would be like, oh, wow, I'm not going to pick up the phone and call a prosecutor about this guy. But I picked up the phone, I called his defense attorney, and I said, tell me what happened. And as you listen to this guy's story, you realize the kid is 21. He has depression that was never diagnosed, never treated. The gun that he had, the officers made statements to the fact that he was talking about using the gun on himself, that he was suicidal. And so there was all this nuance in the story. So he was overcharged, over-indicted, and he probably didn't belong in prison. And even if he did the 4 years in prison that they were offering him, I bet you he would come out and be no better off. And so I fought hard to get him out of the criminal justice system and into our program. And 6 months later, you wouldn't even recognize this young man, because the depression he was suffering from is now being treated at the agency, because we're a mental health service provider. He's getting his GED, he's working on getting a job, and he's almost unrecognizable. And that's the difference between 6 months in a community-based program, connected to his family and other people who care, as opposed to being sent away for 4 years in prison and spending $100-something thousand and getting abysmal outcomes. Mic at the audience. I don't know how to act. So when I think about how we handle criminal justice in our country, we're at the point where we over-police very specific communities, right? The way people talk about who ends up in prison. The way people end up in prison has a lot to do with the way we police certain communities. And things like stop and frisk and other forms of heavy-handed policing. I mean, the Supreme Court said stop and frisk is legal and that it's a fair tactic for police officers to use, except in many cities, they don't use it the way it should be used, like a surgeon's scalpel, and instead it's used like a blunt axe. And it destroys communities. And that is a lot about who ends up in prison. The way we do drug busts, we do them on a corner, open air drug busts. Does that mean that other people are not using drugs? No, it means that we're not policing those spaces where other people are using drugs. And so every prison I've walked into in the United States looks the same, because police officers target communities that have the least amount of resources to fight back. And that ends up creating the makeup of our prisons all across this country. We also create criminal justice policy in a way that's very fear-driven. And that's why we can spend so much money. Because if you scare the hell out of people, they'll pay anything to keep that away from them. So I think of Chicago right now, where Gary McCarthy is the chief of police. He happens to be a friend. He happens to be a colleague. Someone who knows that stop and frisk doesn't work. Someone who knows that heavy-handed policing doesn't work. And yet, with the case that happened recently with the young lady that was killed, the innocent bystander, his response has been to be tougher on those communities, to deploy paramilitary police officers to go out into those communities and be heavy-handed, to lock up more kids. And it's unfortunate that the media, because if it bleeds, it leads, the media tends to drive our criminal justice policy making in this country, even in a state where you have a decision maker who knows better. So I'm going to tell you two stories. When I was leaving prison, after doing 6 years, there was a correction officer in my unit, and the correction officer said to me, very matter-of-factly, just in a casual conversation, he said, you know, you being in prison helped me to get my boat, and when your son gets here, he's going to help my son get his boat. And it was hard to hear it, but it was one of the most honest things that anyone's ever said to me, and it was hugely valuable to me because it shapes the way I think about this work. And so as you think about how do we undo the mess that we've gotten ourselves into, number one, you need to believe in tipping points. Because it took us a long time to get here. It seems so formidable that the day-to-day work that you do, you sort of ask yourself, how are you really breaking down the system? So you have to believe in tipping points. But number two, you have to be reminded that if you just have this conversation in a criminal justice silo, you're not going to solve the problem. Prisons are economic engines. And now that we're privatizing our prisons, there's a huge lobby of folks that are out there in support of our criminal justice system. I have an older brother who's a federal correction officer. Grew up in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, single-parent household, poor as hell on public assistance, and yet I have a hard time convincing my brother that the people who end up in his prison didn't all put themselves there. And so think about that as you think about how to undo this system, that there's an economic issue, underlying issue. But the other story is that when I got into prison, they do this assessment to check your educational level, and this correction counselor said to me, he said, wow, look at your grades. You should go to college. That's the first time anyone had ever said that to me. It could have happened 10 years earlier, but it happened in prison. And both of those stories are 3-minute interactions with human beings that I'm going to remember for the rest of my lives. I tell those stories because every single person in this room can have that impact on someone who's incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And even if the person has heard the message 1,000,000 times, often it's not the message, it's also the messenger. So where are we going? So in New York State, for instance, we got rid of our Rockefeller drug laws, we got rid of our mandatory minimums, which I'm proud as someone who worked on that because unfortunately we led the country in the wrong direction 40 years ago with mandatory minimums. And yet I would tell you to keep your eye on the ball because if you look at what's happening around guns in the United States, New York State passed the first gun control bill, and it is gun control for some people and mandatory minimum for others. We are going from the war on drugs to the war on guns, and it's going to disproportionately impact young men of color. There's all these gang provisions in it, and I'll tell you, keep your eye on the ball. Don't lose sight just because of the amazing work that's happening around reentry. And remember that the criminal justice system impacts very specific communities. Even if you have 51,000 people in your prison, they are not returning all over your state. They are returning to very specific communities that are going to be disproportionately impacted. But the communities that are disproportionately impacted by crime and law enforcement and imprisonment are also the communities that are disproportionately impacted by victimization and disproportionately impacted by trauma. And so as you have a conversation about people involved in the criminal justice system, do not lose sight of the fact that the people that you're treating, I guarantee you, everyone you come in contact with who's been involved in the criminal justice system has a story of being a victim and not having been treated for that victimization. Because when you look at the posters that talk about victims in the United States, they look like white young women who've been raped. But the truth of the matter is that is young black men are the most prevalent victim of violent crimes in the United States. And those are the folks that you're working with day to day. And so don't get caught up in this conversation where you have this thick line between the victims community and the offender community. Because the truth is that sometimes it's in the same family and sometimes it's in the same human being. So lastly, the other thing is our government is moving in the direction of pushing nonprofits and organizations like Gold Ring to produce all these amazing outcomes, right? We spend over $1 billion on corrections here. I bet you no one says, wait a minute, what do your outcomes look like? But for nonprofits, for social service agencies, for initiatives like Gold Ring, like the Fortune Society, we're being held to all these standards. And one of them is the reduction of recidivism. I'm going to tell you, recidivism and incarceration are functions of the state. You have little control over how many people the state and the city locks up. You have little control over how many people get violated on parole or probation. In New York, we have reduced our parole and probation violations drastically. Had nothing to do with the Fortune Society. Had to do with leadership over parole and probation. So at the Fortune Society, take a look at our website when you get a chance. 46 years we've been around. You won't see much about recidivism on that website. You will see a lot about how we work hard to change people's lives. Because focusing on recidivism is a way to lose sight of what you really should be doing to change people's lives. So in the beginning, I talked about what works. I want to say it one more time before I exit the stage. It's not just evidence-based interventions. They're important. It's not just the statistics. It's not just recidivism. It's not just modalities. All those things are important. We employ them at the Fortune Society. You need to spend a lot of time giving people hope, trusting them, empowering them, and helping them see a vision for themselves, even when they don't have that vision. Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's give it up again for Glenn Martin. I just want to say something really quick in line with what Glenn said, right? Today is really about people. There are people all around you. Make sure you talk to the person next to you. Make sure you, at least not while people are presenting, right? But make sure that you interact with the people around you. We need to get these conversations going. We need to build coalitions. We need to get to know people that have similar passions and dreams of a better world like we do. So make sure you talk and communicate today. Thank you.
Again. So thank you, Mr. Martin. And now I would like to introduce a spoken word poet, Mouth.
How's everybody doing?
Great.
Oh, come on.
Great.
We're here to break the system. How's everybody doing? Yeah, that's what I like to hear. So, when I was asked to do this, I was looking at, he's trying to pick a piece, and I know some of you are a little bit nervous. You've heard me before. I'm not going to go where some of you have heard me go before. But I was trying to choose appropriate pieces, and I realized how many of my pieces were written with the prison bars literally overlooking, metaphorically and literally overlooking many of these words. This one, the first one that I'm going to drop, was actually written post 9/11, immediately post 9/11 in LA, when the police, our incarceration system absolutely has beautiful, wonderful, creative ways to incarcerate us, right? Unbelievable. And every time there's a crisis, whoa, the first place you want to go is the prison, because you're either going to go or you're going to be escorted to prison by the state. And in this particular case, what happened was the police went door to door in the Bangladeshi community in LA, pulling out everyone with a Muslim-sounding name. And of course, many of them were African-American, many of them were immigrants from Bangladesh, and they lined them up in the immigration, in what was then called the INS. And many of them were either deported or incarcerated. And we were protesting outside, and I wrote this. There were no words, right? So I had to put it down on paper. So this one's for everybody who's been creatively incarcerated. This one goes out to you. And I will also say some of you know me from another part of my life as a professor here in the School of Social Work, and I asked for, and from Occupy, I asked for your indulgence. I'm trying to bring a little bit of my street, at least, into the University of Pennsylvania, which might incorporate some words that we don't necessarily teach in the classroom. I am a terrorist. No, for real. I am a motherfucking terrorist. Shit, Osama ain't got jack shit on me. You mouth are charged with spinning rhymes that complicate simple minds, leaving them out of line with our times. Rhymes that cannot be American because they trust vengeance. How do you plead? Guilty. You mouth are charged with sedition, the creation of revolution with the notion that power belongs back to our black population, a realization that will destroy our white-ass nation. How do you plead? Guilty. I plead guilty. I plead guilty, and my plea ain't to you or me. My plea is a testimony to history. See, you can't pass judgment when you've already tried to destroy me. I am that victim of police brutality that never made it to national TV. I'm the slave about whom there is no story because I died in captivity. I am the native who never made it to American because you slaughtered me and wounded me. I am the shepherd you crucified so gleefully at Laramie because of my homosexuality. So abso-fucking-lutely, I plead guilty. I plead guilty, and I'm here to make amends for history. So da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, I spray words dipped in the memory of slavery, words dipped in the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, words that bind you to me and I to we, so we can collectively bear testimony to this travesty. So da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, I spray words ringing with the cries of Allah, stripped from the walls of Ramullah, words dripping with the anguish of my sisters in India, fought 1,000,000 times over for what? A national border? The USA? India? Africa? What the fuck ever? So I say to you again, I am a terrorist. I am a terrorist. And I insist that you resist. I insist that you throw up your motherfucking fist. I insist that you persist in staying pissed. Because you are their terrorist. And if words are all you can spit, then fuck. Don't swallow that shit, because you gotta rip it to live it, deliver it to mean it, then step back and watch that shit hit. Blam, blam, blam. Those first three were for racism, sexism, and politicianism. Blam, blam, blam. Those next three were for homophobia, for dubious America, and for this racist paranoia. Blam, blam. What? You thought this word revolver maybe was a six-shooter? Hell the fuck no. This here is an ass-jiggered hellraiser. A master blaster that will blast the master with my finger on the trigger. So, blam, that was for Nike. Blam, that was for Pepsi. Blam, that was for McDonald's. Blam, that was for fucking life. I hate McLife. See, I wasn't always like this. See what I mean? I wasn't always like this. I came to this country to study physics. You know, I'm Indian. Smoked some grass, chased some horse, and then they went into Iraq, and I kept smoking. Then they raised visions of Vietnam by going into Afghanistan, and I kept smoking. Then they carpet bombed Bosnia and went into Somalia, and I kept smoking. Then they beat up my 7-year-old daughter for stepping up to their racist paranoia, and I stopped smoking. I stopped smoking, and I started choking. I stopped smoking, and I started spitting, because enough is enough is enough. I need to get tough. I need to resist. I need to persist in staying pissed. I need to throw up my motherfucking fist, because I am, and always will be, your motherfucking terrorist. Thank you. So I really want to thank GRI for the amazing, amazing, amazing conference they're putting up today. This really needed to happen. This really did. And I mean, there have been so many people working behind the scenes, Kirk, faculty, but I want to introduce to you two folks who have absolutely without whom this conference would not have taken place. They are amazing, and I'm proud to say that they are students at the School of Social Policy and Practice, amazing MSW students. This is what I think social workers should be. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Erica, Zamla, and Nancy. Incredible, incredible. was incarcerated, waiting to go on trial in this particular. This was something where they got me on the Patriot Act, and I was looking at about 30 years at that point. And you know what happened then was my partner and my daughter, they were there outside, and one of the things that my daughter said was, you know, and she was amazing. She was brave. She was amazing. She said, "But how are you going to be cool with mom? You know, how are you and mom going to work it out if you go away for 30 years?" And that really got to me. And that's the part that we don't talk about, right? The disruption of our families, the disruption of our romance, the disruption of our poetry with others outside. So this one goes out to all those folks who are struggling to make it through 30 years of love. I haven't really performed this lately. I don't really perform this one. I tried telling you how I feel today. How I was in love with you the moment I opened my eyes, 11 years before you ever arrived. How I came through beatings and slashings, shootings and killings, living through losing, graduating with a doctorate in surviving, knowing you were watching from just beyond my peripheral vision. How I'd be conjuring you up with the last dregs of my exhausted imagination, even though it'll take 30 years and half an earth revolution for you to see my sun on your horizon. How I'd be waiting for that smile 30 years on the sidelines, waiting for our love to age like vintage wine, trying to fight insanity with this insane fantasy that you were just beyond that next landmine. How that land of mine was the delta of your Nile, your love's intifada liberating my Palestine. How every time I'd be dying for one more time, every time I'd be crying for one more sign, I'd snort one more line of love-laced rhyme, drop one more dime on a palm reader's lifeline, promising our meeting somewhere in future time. How, when I'm mesmerized by your eyes, when I'm drowning in your sighs, when I'm looking up from the valley of your thighs, when I'm looking down from the peaks of our highs, I realize that with you, my past always dies. And since I've never ever been without you, those harsh past realities are just so many meaningless lies. So I try telling you how I feel today. How I love you in intangibles. A Ray Charles note just beyond audible. A Klimt canvas barely visible. How a sneeze or a giggle opens up a dam of feelings just when I decide that to feel any more is absolutely impossible. I tried telling you how I sleep only when we are wrapped in each other, how your laughter leaves my heart in tatters, how everything that matters lies in the heart of our life together. I tried telling you, but my words are like imprisoned rapiers pointed at your soul, raping, ripping, stripping, licking, drawing bloody tears, searching for that love underneath. I tried telling you, and my words twisted in this 30-year-old wind, lashing at its moorings, slashing and hurting with misunderstanding. So I write and I shield paper from the storming, knowing that the true worth of what I'm feeling lies hidden between these lines I'm writing. So like I said, the incarceration system incarcerates us really creatively. And I gotta tell you, one of the ways in which I as an immigrant have seen this is the way in which the United States itself is, barred off by the laws of immigration. How many of our families are actually, separated through those immigrant laws. We don't see them, we're incarcerated, we can't work, we're deported. So this one has special meaning for me as an immigrant. I wrote this while sitting at the INS office. So this one's called Conversation with an INS Office, and it's bilingual. And please listen because there's a role for you guys to play, okay? This is the last piece. আমার জীবন বাটিকের বাটি দুটি দিক, একটি দিক একদম পরিষ্কার, আরেকটি দিক নিরাশার ছায়া, একদম অন্ধকার। Translation. You want to know about my motherfucking life, motherfucker? I'll tell you about my motherfucking life. My life is like a blinking neon sign promising more. 30 cents an hour for a peep show with this Indian whore. Or cheap-ass Indian takeout wrapped and ready to go. My life is like the embarrassed smile of a white cop in Motown, asking more of that town because he never got it the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth time round. My life is spelled L-I-F-E without the fucking F, a goddamn L-I-E that will turn you fucking deaf. My life is like the two sides of a driver's license. On the one side, a date, a decade too late. On that other side, shit. Have you ever read that shit on the other side of your driver's license? Have you read that fucking small print? Do you fucking goddamn read? Do you fucking goddamn read? Do you read about how they call me an anti-Semite because I fight for the right of what's mine in Palestine? Do you read about how they force my daughter to support a war where they go killing people who look like her own father? Do you read about how they deny me a fucking visa because I'm from India, the goddamn wrong skin color? Do you goddamn fucking read? Do you goddamn fucking read? মাফ করবেন দাদা, খুব অন্যায় হয়ে গেছে, আর হবে না। Translation. I'm sorry. Goddamn fucking crazy, you know? Goes to the territory of being a goddamn fucking refugee. How about this? My wife, she's white. We got married last night. I got wedding rings on both fingers. My left doesn't know what my right's doing here. I see the look in your eyes. You fantasize. See my uncircumcised between her white thighs. God damn man. See, without me, you got no peace, justice, or liberty. See, without me, your sunkiss would be missed, because your goddamn oranges would never get picked. See, without me, your Microsoft would be too fucking micro and too fucking soft. See, without me, you'd actually believe that the epitome of poverty was defined by Eminem rapping about 313. See, without me, Eminem wouldn't walk 1 mile, leave alone A to the sweatshop manufacturing Nikes. See, without me, you can point to me as your one minority to justify your fucking hypocrisy. So, God damn man, give me that God-forsaken stamp on my hand and let me enter your God-forsaken land. As Bob Dylan demands, how many roads must a man walk down before he can call him a man? How many dead-end streets must one immigrant sweep before he realizes that this American dream just ain't fucking sweet? Hato chala chala, haram jala sala, mother chod sala, muk pora sala, mother band chod sala. Translation, fuck you. Ar ami parbo na. আর আমি করব না, আমি আমেরিকান হব না, আমি ইনকার্সেরেটেড হব না, আমি রেসিস্ট হব না, আমি ইনকার্সেরেটেড হব না। Translation: na, meaning no, meaning to resist, meaning to persist in staying pissed, meaning to be their lyrical mujahideen, to be their poetic fadaeen. So when I say no, you say na. When I say no, you say na. Okay? No. No. আমি আর পারবো না, আমি আর হব, আমি আমেরিকান হব, আমি ইনকার্সেরেটেড হব, আমি রেসিস্ট হব, আমি আমেরিকান হব, আমি ইনকার্সেরেটেড হব, আমি রেসিস্ট হব। Translation: there ain't no translating that shit. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. One more time, let's give it up for Mal. Okay, so we're going to start our first panel for the day. Just to let you know how these panels are going to be structured, each of our panelists will have about 10 minutes to kind of introduce him or herself and talk a little bit about their story or their theme. And then we also will have a moderator who will be asking questions, and then at the end we'll have a lot of time to take questions from the audience. So we really ask you, I know there are a lot of people who have a lot of great events coming up and a lot of great things they're doing, but if we could really focus on questions within the audience, we'd really appreciate it. So I'd like to introduce our moderator for the first panel. His name is Mr. George Mosey. He is the Deputy District Attorney in charge of the Juvenile Division. He's been in this position since 2002. Just a really well-respected, incredible individual who has really started the conversation going and kind of gotten everybody